everyone, and welcome to the NFCA's Educate to Elevate series. This February, we are talking bullying and hazing. And a lot of coaches can find themselves in situations in their program where they didn't even know bullying and hazing existed. So we are here to help you understand what it is, how you can identify it, best practices to help your team understand it, and most importantly, how to stop it. We have some leading industry experts with us that are going to cover a variety of topics as it relates to bullying and hazing. So let's get started. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining. As you know, our Educate to Elevate forums have been ongoing for several months now, and it's been a fantastic way to bring together industry leaders on a topic and also fellow coaches and people who are just looking for a little bit more insight on some of the things that occur in your coaching life that aren't softball related or X's and O's related. And what we're going to get into tonight is bullying, hazing, and I'm sure a variety of other subtopics on that, as it is not that simple of just those two words. But my name is Joanna Lane. I'm the Director of Education with the NFCA, and I'm thrilled to help facilitate the conversation. We have a lot of panelists tonight, which always makes it fun. So we're going to get to them because they're way better to listen to than I am. We're going to go alphabetical order here with these wonderful individuals. They're going to tell you who they are, where they're from, and a little bit about their connection to the topic. In the meantime, start getting those questions in. We have several from the registration form, but if there's something you want to know more about, go ahead and use that chat and we will get you going in there. We do generally ask them chronologically, so don't wait. Get to the top of the line. Let's go ahead and get started. Angel, you are up first, and go ahead and introduce yourself, what you're doing today.
Thanks so much for having me. Angel Brutus here. I currently serve as the Assistant Athletic Director for Counseling and Sports Psychology at Mississippi State University. It is an inaugural position, and I'm actually in my third season with it, so building that program from the ground up. Responsible for providing services directly to our student athlete population across all sports. And with that, it's a couple of things. So the clinical side of things, counseling as well, but also the sports psychology side of things, so mental skills training. Really excited to be here with you all. Also, in my spare time, if that's even a thing that exists, I'm also a facilitator with Positive Coaching Alliance. And so we do a lot of these workshops and facilitations for coaches, athletes, parents, and everyone that's in that sport ecosystem. So really looking forward to this conversation, and thanks for letting me be a guest.
You bet. Coach Ricketts speaks very highly of you, so thank you for your work and keeping her in line too. Appreciate your help there. Brian, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name's Brian Koppam. I'm another round ball sport former coach. I coached college soccer for almost 20 years. Started with 8 years at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama, and then moved to Florida and coached as a head D1 coach for about 10 years. Have a little bit of experience in the topic that's coming tonight. By no means an expert, but can hopefully share some information, experiences, and things I learned through my journey as a Division I head coach.
Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate you taking the time to share. And it's always fantastic when we get other sports involved because it's such a different perspective. So thank you so much for joining us. Samantha, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. Samantha Exran calling in from Durham, North Carolina, where we are awaiting an ice storm, which means everything is going to stop for like the week. So I'm really happy to be here. I know this is a tough topic, and I'm really looking forward to hearing all the different panelists take on it. And just my goal is that you log off tonight and feel a little bit better with specific ideas on how to handle, this really relevant and timely issue in college sports, and especially in women's sports, right? I think that this issue of bullying is definitely surfacing a lot. And so looking forward to this great discussion. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Jen.
Good evening. Thank you all for having me and hosting this great roundtable. I am Jen Waldron. I am the Dean of the Graduate College at University of Northern Iowa. But my home department is kinesiology, where I've taught for almost 20 years. And like Angel, my interest area was sports psychology. I am here because I have a thread of research that looks at hazing in sport from both the athlete and the coach perspective. As a former athlete, basketball, not softball, I experienced hazing in my D3 college days playing, and it ended up being a foray into my research. And so I'm excited to be here and also look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. And Jill.
Right, well, thanks for having me. I'm Jill Zwagerman. I'm an attorney in Des Moines, and my specialty is when things go bad for you all, I jump in there and I help you through the legal aspect of it. I've made kind of a name for myself in subtle gender bias against specifically female coaches and what you all have to deal with. I call it discrimination. You may all call it bullying. I call it discrimination because that's a legal term and that's how I can help you. So I'm here, hopefully, to just sort of provide a little guidance and give a little indication of what the law says. And if I need to jump in, things have probably gone bad. And so hopefully we don't get to that point and no one has to call me after this. But if it does get bad, I know how to help you. So that's why I'm here. And thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And again, make sure you get those questions coming in the chat. I think, Jen, we'll start with you on just the basic, what is hazing or what is bullying? And we'll come back around the horn. I think everybody probably has a different definition, but how is it defined? And then is it different in how it's perceived?
Great questions. And so we all know that hazing is kind of a slippery word. And so for a lot of pieces, there may be something that seems like hazing, but we are all a little bit fearful of calling it hazing, because typically in our society, what we see or hear is that when things are really, really bad, so these extreme situations that we see in sport in particular, also in Greek life, that's when we call them hazing. And so how I think about hazing is that it's a spectrum of behaviors from much more mild to much more severe. And again, it's the severe cases that we typically hear about in the news and the public. It is something required that is embarrassing or degrading, required to join a particular team or group of people, even though your membership is really not dependent on it. So my being a new player on a softball team, I'm already a part of that softball team. My teammates don't get to decide whether or not I'm a member, but hazing is also required of that membership from the social peer group sort of thing. And so I think one of the pieces that we have is a language issue where hazing really only means these severe behaviors that make news. So when they result in sexual assault, when they result in physical assault, that's when we think about hazing, when actually there's this whole pyramid where we have more mild or benign behaviors. So these could be sexual in nature. They could be much more benign potentially, such as having to sing a song, with the new athletes having to sing the song, but not the older athletes having to, or the veterans. And so I guess I could add some more specifics, but I'll start there and open up the conversation.
Oh, fantastic. Angel, let's go to you next. Anything to build on that? And when you think about, parlaying that into the student athlete and what the student athlete maybe would see as a definition or, a similarity or difference there.
Yeah, so just thinking about the lived experience, I love the way that you phrased the question because it's about perception. I also want to extend on what Jen shared in terms of it specifically is tailored towards individuals who are trying to join without recognizing that they already are a member, right? And so there's a difference. So there's a structural difference that's there. As I was kind of listening, I love writing notes. So I take lots of notes to get my thoughts together. And so one of the things that Jen mentioned was this required degradation for membership. And I think that's the critical piece to consider, especially if we're looking at the difference between hazing and bullying. There's a chronic piece that's acquired a lot with bullying. The hazing piece, there seems to be a potential stop timeline with that, depending on if there's a collective decision that a person has officially joined, quote unquote. And Jen, you can kind of help me out with that too. But I think in terms of, from an athlete perspective, this is also one of the key indicators for if an athlete will even report a hazing incident, because there is a stop timeline to it, because there is this desire to have that sense of belonging within the culture that's created there. And so I think that's the reason why it becomes a very slippery slope. And a lot of times people lean heavily on the more extreme examples, as what Jen has mentioned. But there's definitely that differentiation between the bullying aspect of it being more chronic and it doesn't necessarily have an end point to it, versus the hazing piece where it specifically is about degradation to join.
All right, so we got the doctor speak out of the way there. Get you guys going. We're going to the lawyer speak coming up next. But Samantha, I'm curious, the requirement piece. I'm thinking of it as we don't have to, but everybody else is doing this, but you don't have to. And then is the feeling that I really do have to, and how does that play into what we're talking about?
Well, I'm grateful Jill's here because I feel like I have backup here. So if I'm missing anything, I hope, Jill, you jump right in. I think it's important to note that almost every state that I'm aware of defines hazing, right? And I just took a glance through before the Zoom tonight and get a sense. Like in North Carolina, and it doesn't surprise me, it focuses on physical injury as part of an initiation. Other states have much broader definitions, that have to do more with what we've talked about with, perception, or that it's not just, physical, and then deals with intent, and harm and whatnot. So, I think legally, it depends a lot on what state you are in, and then in a university or an institution, I have no doubt that those handbooks have policies that define hazing and bullying. And so that is absolutely something that you as a coach should look at, if you're an employee somewhere, to be very familiar with clearly what is the definition, where you're at, and what you're responsible for supervising, and either being aware or that you should have been aware will be the standards I think that we'll talk about later. And it is hard, and I actually think it's gotten harder. And I don't know quite why. I think that's where the psychology will come in, but norms have changed. And so things that flew when we were athletes, however many years ago, are not okay now. And so being a coach and being responsible for your team, and kind of how they treat each other, which I think is at the core of all of this, right? It's the relationships and the trust that's built on the team. And so I can't wait to get to that part, because I think that's more of like, what can we do? But I'm sure we'll get to that after we get through, kind of the tough stuff, which is what does it look like? How is it? And then how can we prevent it? But Jill, help me fill in. What else?
I don't really have much more to fill in. I was going to say the same thing, that it's more dependent upon your handbooks. Most of the state laws that I'm aware of don't really care that much about hazing if you're singing a song, or, they care when you get into a physical injury, a sexual assault, property damage, something like that, where the law actually cares that something has been harmed or someone has been harmed. But from a legal perspective, as far as the university is concerned with you in your role as that coach, under those handbooks, you have a lot more accountability with those sorts of policies. And that's one thing that if you're not on the same page with your administration, I would caution is something that they could try to use against you, right? Depending upon how strong their their policies are. So you want to make sure you know what's going on with your team, which is always what you want, right? You always want to know what's going on with your team. But, you know, I'm thinking back to my track days when I ran track, and I had a hazing of, we made in the off season, everyone run from bar to bar in our tights, right? That wasn't a thing. Everyone wears tights today, but no one wore tights back then. And that would probably fall under those policies. It was perfectly fine back then, but today I'd probably get in trouble for that. And my coach knew it was happening, and he probably would have gotten in trouble too. So yeah, it's exactly like Samantha said, that the law, or the what flew back in the day doesn't fly anymore. So it's really up to the coach to be really responsible and accountable, because while you may not be held criminally liable or civilly liable, the university could come back at you for breaking the policy.
I think that's a great point, because there are oftentimes, you know, I, like many of you, spent a lot of my life coaching. You don't know exactly what's going on. I mean, you think you know, or you have a handle, but you don't always. So, you know, Brian, let's come to you. You hear some of these things, and you know, how do coaches start the process of, you know, the conversation? Is it a rule in a handbook? Is it, because, you know, rules and handbooks get broken all the time.
Absolutely. I think the first thing that you have to do is make sure you have it outlined very, very clear in your handbook. And the advice I would give is go to your student life or your athletic department, get their words, their statement, and yours needs to match it almost identically, because that's what you're going to be judged by as a team, as a coach on the campus. And then the next thing that I found that was probably the most beneficial is be real with them. Even if it's the very first meeting. I can remember probably about 2015 or so, I put up a slide, one of the Sports Illustrated, you know, college edition stories. A team, lacrosse team, season canceled due to hazing. And you can read the first paragraph: due to blindfolded, drinking, you know, spinning around, all these things. And you could just see the eyes get wide. And then I think it's, you know, you don't have to necessarily show all the different cases, but I think it's very important to give real life examples, like Jill mentioned, and I think Angel mentioned, you know, some of the things that happen, you know, tell them. I think it's good to tell the entire team, but I also think it's even more beneficial sometimes to tell your leadership group, if you have one, not just your captains, because that's one or two people, but tell your upperclassmen, maybe tell all the returners, here's what this looks like. This includes, you know, drinking, over drink, you know, how making them drink, making them dance, making them sing, wearing a homemade t-shirt the first day of class, dressing them up, you know, and just list out all the things that might be possible. And, you know, some of them, you know, wearing a funny t-shirt the first day of school, that's a little embarrassing. Everybody's like, oh, it's no big deal. But kind of like Jill said, you know what, today you're going to be in training for, you know, whether it's sensitivity or learning training for hours if you make them wear a homemade funny t-shirt on the first day of class. So I think real life examples is really important for them to hear. Okay, this covers all the way, not just the, you know, the old fraternity hazing type things or sorority things, but this goes all the way, you know, give them the whole spectrum and give them real life examples, because I think that's important for them to hear. So that way, when they make a decision, they go, the switch goes, okay, I know we can't make her take this shot. We can't make her do this, you know, this act. And that way they've got some real life examples.
That's great advice. Thank you. Jen, a question in the chat, which I think is great. It's a private message, but it's asking about youth sports, club, rec, travel teams having a policy on bullying. And I think my favorite part of the question is, I'm not sure hazing happens at this level. Can you give us some background on age appropriate and when people may start seeing that?
So I would say that there's probably two different factors that are also that interact with age. So one has to do with the popularity of the sport. And so more popular sports within a community, you probably may see hazing at an earlier age. And so what happens is that they start to feel like they have the social identity that puts them on a different playing field or a different level than the rest of the community or the rest of their peers. And so the idea is that someone really has to prove that they're able to wear that label or that identity. And so, you know, Jill and I are in Iowa. Wrestling is a really popular activity. And so lots of times we see wrestling, hazing happening on wrestling teams at an earlier age because of the prestige that they have in communities. The other piece would be the amount of time that the athletes have unsupervised. And so at younger levels, we tend to see hazing happening in locker rooms before, after, or overnight trips where there's a lack of supervision. And so those tend to be the spaces where we see hazing happening. I don't think we have a good grasp at how young it starts at. I have talked with athletes, college athletes who are hazed in high school, and most of them talk about hazing starting at that time. There's a couple that would say middle school, and again, that kind of depends on the community as well as the sport. I wouldn't be surprised if we were seeing some behaviors starting earlier, particularly when there's a lack of supervision from adults.
Thank you. Same kind of question, Jill. Should those coaches have something in place from a liability and protection standpoint?
Absolutely. You know, just anyone can file a lawsuit, right? And it doesn't even have to have grounds. You can go down to your county court and file a lawsuit if you want. So having those policies and procedures in place gives you as a coach and as an organization, you know, well, these are my rules. This is what I expect. This is, it lets you rely on something tangible, right? As opposed to not having a policy which says, well, then how do the kids know what your expectations are of them? So absolutely, a policy at any level regarding hazing, bullying, discrimination, anything like that is important.
So what are some of the ways that we can start? So we've, you know, identified what bullying and hazing really might be, identifying some of the things that we're communicating with student athletes, clear expectations, default to the handbook, et cetera, but there's got to be more. What comes next? What are the ways that you can continually show the student athletes where that line is? And the term that keeps coming back is head coach control, right? That's what just keeps coming back in the compliance term of, you know, it's your job to know. If you don't know, you know, tough luck. So Angel, let's come to you. What are some of the things that you're doing in your athletic department? And then Sam, Brian, will circle back.
Yeah, I think for me, it's interesting because I myself find my role to be one that can be pretty ambiguous at times, especially with head coaches across different sports. But I'm going to shout out Coach Ricketts because she's been one that has been really on board with our department from the beginning. And I think that's part of it, right? Normalizing the services that our department provides, inviting us in. So we're not guests, we are actually a part of the team. I think that's something to be held at a high esteem. And, you know, part of that also requires for the coaches, as you've articulated, is to be able to really outline in tangible ways what the expectations are within the team. And so, you know, we define culture as the way that we do things here. And it's not the way that I do things, it's the way that we do things. And so there's a stated expectation that it's a collective buy-in to everything in terms of the coaching philosophy. I remember years ago, even prior to coming to MSU and facilitating coaching workshops at, you know, different levels, at the pro level, collegiate level, youth level, club level. And one of the things that I always found to be a little bit jarring is when I would pose the question to coaches about their coaching philosophy, all of them would raise their hands and say that they have one that exists. But when I start teasing back and peeling back and asking them, how is your coaching philosophy then manifested into the day-to-day activities that you hold with your team? You know, is it written somewhere? Do they have reminders of it? Is it something that's discussed once in the beginning of a season and never discussed again? Is this a part of something that's interwoven into the fabric that you're creating? Because whether we recognize it or not, your culture is going to be established. So why not be intentional with it? If it means microdosing some of those philosophy strategies and putting them around your facilities so that the students and the athletes can see it on a more consistent basis. The relationship that you have with parents, are you communicating what your philosophy is with them so that you are now extending your coaching tree and also collaborating with the parents in a way to where it becomes a lifestyle so that you are having reinforcements long after the students are away from your field and out of your purview. I think that goes back to what Jill was talking about earlier in terms of, what Jen was talking about earlier about when students are out of supervision, these are some of the behaviors that tend to escalate. And so having these different touch points in many different ways is extremely important. I think it's also important to communicate with your leadership council, whether it's your captains or whether you have other leadership structures across all different classes. So you can have a leadership structure with your seniors, your juniors, your sophomores, and even your incoming freshmen. You can even have a leadership council amongst those who are transferring in, because that experience is going to be different for them as well. And so how do you coalesce around all of that in a way that then helps to outline how they contribute to what the philosophy is for the culture as well? Because the more that they contribute to it, the more that they're going to own the experiences of themselves as well as with their teammates. And so I can go on, and I do have some tangible things that we can kind of talk about later, but I don't want to take up too much time right now.
Thank you. No, that was great. Samantha, let's come to you. And what would you add?
I mean, I don't know what I'd add, because Angel was on a roll and I was like saying, just keep singing, because you're saying all the things that made me feel better. Because, we talk about leadership and parents and, repetitiveness. I think the only thing that I might kind of amplify in that message is I really do think it needs to be more collective and player owned. And while I absolutely fundamentally agree you need the policies, and that's your backbone, and it's defined by your university and you incorporate it into your team handbook or team policies. It cannot be you are Moses, and here's the mountaintop and here come down the tablets with the rules and that's it. This is not like, this is the culture of the team and that's it. These days, I've seen a lot of successful exercises that coaches really engage their leadership and their whole team in defining what conduct is acceptable, what is not, and being really clear about it. Having that happen over the whole year, really. I mean, it's natural to have it at the beginning when everybody's, you have your new players and you're all coming together. But I also think, like, y'all are smart. When do these things usually happen, right? It's like the first weekend, before the first game, after the first game. Be strategic with when you revisit, very pointedly, to Brian's point, what's acceptable and what's not. And don't, you can't bury your head in the sand and just cross your fingers and hope that everything goes okay this weekend.
Yeah, so Brian, as you hear kind of the conversation, and where does it take you in your mind, and what are some things that you would pass on to coaches?
I think Angel hit the nail on the head with the leadership committee. I think, and going across all ages, I think you need to have, I would always try to find a leader in each class and each grade, and not just the most popular one, but the one that, I kind of thought of almost like grooming for captain eventually, as they get to be maybe an upperclassman. But the way, if you've got, depending on how big your teams are, my teams of women's soccer was about 25. So 2 per class would give me 6 to 8, depending if I had 2 in each class. 8, obviously, if it was all 4 classes, and that's about a third of your team. If you can find a third of your team and kind of, just like Sam said, kind of over and over be honing these things, even if it's after the first game, right before, Labor Day weekend or whatever holiday, President's Day weekend you guys have for softball, if you have that off, have that another quick meeting there just to reiterate, here's the expectations. And one thing that I heard that I tried to instill, it can be little things too. One of the things that drove me absolutely nuts was the freshmen had to get in line last to eat dinner at, the first meal of the team or something like that. And so one year I finally I got fed up with it over and over. And finally I was like, all right, I've got them remembered on the first day when it's going nuts. I've got to say something about it. And so I looked at my upperclassmen and I said, how would you feel as a freshman scared to death, being a fall sport, the first day their parents come in, they move into a dorm, their parents drop them off and they go home. And I said, how would it feel? What would it feel different if you said, hey, we're so excited you're here, we want you to eat first, instead of, hey, you 6 go to the back of the line because, we're juniors and seniors and you guys make, and try to not just be inclusive of the freshmen, but kind of show them that the culture that Angel mentioned, and try to start that from the very first, the very first team meal you have, start that inclusion of the freshmen and constant reminders, like Sam said. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Jen, I want to come back to you. You hear with hazing specifically, that it just continually gets worse, right? It's like, I was hazed and so I'm going to do something else, or it's the one up. How does that happen? What are some things that go into play with that? And how do you combat that when it starts to seem as a natural thing?
Yeah, so let me take just a couple of different pieces of that. And so I think it's a fallacy that, it continues to get worse. I think part of it is that we're hearing about it more and have greater awareness than we did. And so that is part of this. I also think that there is probably not greater reporting, but people are able to say that they're bullied or use other terms instead of hazing, which also kind of leads to this idea that it's more. I will say, particularly with women's sports, we have seen an increase over the last couple of decades. So as female athletes have made greater strides in terms of sponsorship, in terms of professional opportunities, in terms of some of those pieces, what we've seen is that women have started to adopt some of the practices that have historically been associated with men's sport because of the power and prestige that they've been allotted. So we have seen a shift, particularly in the last couple of decades with hazing, particularly with women. So, I think what we know about coaches is that how they respond plays a big role in whether it's going to be continued. And so particularly with high school athletes, we have a lot of high school coaches who just kind of turn a blind eye. They're aware that's happening, but out of sight, out of mind. And there's still very much this idea, particularly with boys, that boys will be boys. And so we'll just let them do this, they'll get it out of their system and then move on from there. So I can't remember the other pieces of your question because I've started going down a different line. But the other thing I just want to say is that alcohol is often a really big part of hazing experiences. And we know that hazing experiences tend to intensify when there's alcohol involved. And so once that starts to become a part of the equation, you do see bigger experiences happening because of the loss of control due to drinking.
Thank you very much. I'm notorious for 18-part questions, so don't feel bad about that at all whatsoever.
Phew, and I'm not writing stuff down like Angel, so.
No, you are good. Jill, she's taking me right to you though, and I've been waiting for this. This is what I'm just really curious about personally. But the gendered piece, the gender norms, the roles, so much of that. I'm just going to turn you loose. What are our female coaches of female sports teams, or what are they seeing that's just different than the male counterparts?
Well, the first thing that will happen is that your female athletes will blame your coach faster than a male athlete will blame their coach, whether it's a male or female coaching females. And it will be even harder if it's a female coaching female. So they will hold the coach responsible because they are looking at you like more of a parental figure than the male athletes do with their coach. So the female coaches are in this terrible, what's called a double bind or in a double standard. They have to be tough. They have to absolutely get their athletes into shape, but then they have to also play mama bear and protect them. And those two roles are absolutely inconsistent with each other. So when you have a situation that a coach cannot stop, they will not only get blamed for it, for not stopping it, they'll get blamed for not then, running and overreacting to the athlete who was injured or to the athlete who was hazed. So it's really problematic. It's very, very difficult, which is why then it comes back to what are your policies? What have you told them? How consistent have you been? And that unfortunately is just, it's nothing that you all are doing. It's what I'm doing with my 4th grade girl right now, right? And preparing her that if something goes wrong, she needs to stand up and say something. And so it's starting at a very young age that we're telling our female athletes like, hey, you don't get to treat me this way. And they carry that through college where the male athletes are like, well, shut up and take it. And if you don't like it, transfer. right? So that's really what happens. And so the coaches of the female sports are really in this predicament that parents have been grooming their kids for. I hate that word, you know, in this particular situation, but I think that's what's happened is we've groomed our female student athletes to take it more personal, take it more harshly. And when you don't stand up for them, it becomes much more difficult for them to move forward and look at the situation like you as a coach, as opposed to you're supposed to be my mom or my dad and you didn't protect me.
Thank you very much. Angel, a lot of affirmation there. Anything you want to add or anything that stands out to you?
Yes, my brain is like going off like Ratatouille right now. Everything that Jill said, I was just like, oh my gosh, yes, that is very true, especially when it comes to women athletes and having women coaches. I would add to that the phenomena of triangulation. I see it as very strong within that dynamic where they almost want to pull the coaches in to join their experience. And it can be very interesting in terms of the power dynamics that are naturally at play and the sense or the perception of rejection if the coach does not join in on that experience with them. So I have nothing else more to add to that, but just something that is just very prevalent when it comes to working with female athletes, specifically with those who have female coaches.
I think the coach piece is interesting too, because I've seen some of the most caring, genuine people in the world be called bullies as a coach because of something that they've said to a player. You know, and something that is seemingly just completely benign, you know, and so I'm curious, Jen, we'll come back to you, but is it the power dynamic in that you have to be extremely aware of? And I'm thinking things like, there's a couple questions on here that might work, but if you're talking to a student athlete about, you know, being in shape, if you're talking to a student athlete about how to properly wear a uniform, if you're talking to a student athlete, you know, about effort or perceived effort, some of those things, what comes into mind and things that coaches are doing that might be taken completely out of context that is going to cause a trouble?
Yeah, one of the things that we adopt is this idea of doing what we call performance profiles. And so the performance profile definitely gives the coach I actually collaborate with the coach and they come up with the different factors that go into the different categories for profiling. So it's a lot of the coaches speak, right? So it's the technical, it's the tactical, it's also the strength and conditioning piece. It's also the intangibles, it's the leadership, it's the effort, it's the mentality, the attitude, those kinds of things. And so what you're doing with the performance profiling is you're giving the athlete an opportunity to actually self-assess and then allow the coach to also assess the athlete across those different domains, and then helping to identify where the gaps are between observation and perception. And it keeps the conversation performance related. And it moves it away from it being a personal, subjective conversation. I think that's extremely important, especially with our female athletes and, you know, for our male athletes as well, because they do actually have a high prevalence of body image issues and concerns. I haven't met an athlete yet who has either been told that their coaches are satisfied with where they are body composition wise. When you find that athlete, you let me know. But no one is ever satisfied, athlete included, right? And so we know that this is a perpetual message because we want them to perform at their highest levels. And we don't want to take that away. So anytime we can get very objective with the conversation and remove the subjective pieces to it, the more that we stay aligned with what the ultimate goal is, which is to continue to help develop this player, but develop them in a way to where they understand the language from a performance standpoint. We do a lot of body composition types of assessments through our nutrition staff, and we do it blind. So we don't even share the numbers with the student because students will be attached to the numbers, and that's the last thing that we want them to do, because if they have the numbers, what are they going to do with it? They're going to try and figure out how to maneuver the numbers, and that's not the key indicator. The key indicator is just giving them feedback on body composition in a way to where they can actually come up with a plan with nutrition, with strength and conditioning, and with their coaches about how to continue to get better, because we also have to recognize that this is a transition stage for them. These are, access to resources that they've never had before. And then specifically with softball, if I can get really sports specific, we're also dealing with those who are at the elite level of different collegiate programs. A lot of these young women were a part of clubs and organizations where they literally didn't practice alongside of their teammates, but they actually traveled to just compete with them and then go back. And so there was no opportunity to kind of be a part of a culture and, day in and day out, sleep, drink, eat, go to class, all of that with their particular athletes, especially those who are part of club sports. And so you have all of these different stakeholders that are now basically assessing in a way to where their role is all evaluative. And so how do you, again, collaborate with the athlete to be a part of that evaluative process? And one of the ways that we do that is by doing the performance profiles.
Thank you. Jen, let's go to you. Some of the things that you're thinking as you hear, the coach to student athlete and how that might be construed.
So I think there's been a couple of threads that are helpful. And I think it's also important that I come from much more of a psychology team perspective. And so the responses I have are kind of on the other side of the spectrum. But so I think there has to, going back to the idea of culture is really important, not just on the team, but within the whole department if you're associated with a larger organization. And so part of this then diffuses the responsibility out, that it's not just the head coach's, the assistant coach's responsibility, but it exists within the entire organization. And, so that's one piece that I think is really, really important, because once that exists across the organization, then hopefully athletes are feeling like they have a proactive role in the relationship, a proactive role in their development, are able to maybe not talk with the head coach, but have formed a relationship with someone else that they can talk to about it. And again, it doesn't have to be the person that, instigated the remark that, I've taken personally, but it could be someone else, and that person then can help the athlete navigate the system. The other piece that I think is so important, that gets tricky as we get to be more elite, is that there's more to the athlete than being an athlete, and helping them recognize their holistic identities and their identities that exist beyond athletics. That also can help kind of take the sting out of some of those comments. And then the last thing I was thinking about is just how we give feedback. And so what mechanisms do you use? Do you have some sort of guidance so that the athletes know what to expect in terms of the feedback that you give? Is there a specific time? Is there a specific way? What do they need to do with that feedback? So those things can be helpful also.
Thank you very much. Samantha, I'm going to come to you, and then Brian will come your way. But I know, Sam, you've talked a lot about so many of these things with our coaches at various times and best practices. What are you thinking as you hear, these snippets, and what should coaches be doing to help facilitate those conversations? The bully word it's scary. It's scary as a coach, and it can easily result in job loss. I mean, we've seen it. So where do coaches need to be?
I mean, I think about this every day, like literally every day, because I listen to coaches who are worried about this, who've been accused of this. And again, the distinction here is, when we started talking, it was hazing, and that was really what was happening among the student athletes, right? The bullying can certainly be, athlete to athlete in your own team, or that I've also seen team to team, right? Or individuals. But we do see the bullying and what Jill was describing as the gender bias, when the student athletes accuse a coach, of being a bully. And what does that mean? What we think it means as coaches is very different than what we are hearing in the complaints, in the ease of complaints. Back to that point, right? I think in almost the encouragement, our former president Karen Weekly talked about, stood up at a convention or in meetings and has talked about, they welcome the new student athletes, and it's like, welcome to X institution and we're so happy. And if you have any problems or complaints, or this is where you go. You know what I mean? It's part of the orientation. And I understand that, but I think it also sets the tone and the expectation that you're probably going to have a complaint, right? And then this is the formal process that triggers. And, you know, so I've thought a lot about how do we fix this, right? How do we, you know, really sort out what are the substantive bullying and kind of, you know, inappropriate conduct and comments and things from tough coaching or even not even tough coaching, just coaching. I'm giving you feedback. You know, your pop-up time needs to be quicker. You know, that's not demeaning, right? So we do go back to that there are facts, and they were lucky because softball is a sport that, you know, does have a lot of stats and stuff. But, you know, and Joanna, you're going to laugh because I'm going to bring it out early. I think it comes back to who's on your roster. I really do. Like fundamentally, the drum that I beat is you get to pick the people who are on your team, really kind of predominantly. You better be picking good matches. And if you know you are one of those coaches, you know, that is tougher or more direct or whatnot, you better be recruiting people who are going to respond to that well. You know, and how do you know? Well, if I really had that magic answer, you know, Joanne and I would already have our jet. But I think you need to take your time in the recruiting process, and you need to really learn about that prospective student athlete and her family and the team culture that she's been in and what her expectations and goals are and what kind of player is she, and have those conversations to get a sense of, do you think that you will be an effective coach? Is that a good match? So there it is. I brought it out. How early? Not even an hour in. Recruit well.
8:48. I'll write that down, and we'll set that as the standard to live by. But Brian, we know that we know there's validity there. I mean, you've lived that as a coach, and many of us have. But as you're thinking through this, you know, what advice would you give to coaches from a practical standpoint?
Sure. I think there's a couple different, you know, the big one that, you know, I hear is when the coach is the bully or you're accused of bullying, and whether it's right or wrong, now if someone says the word bullying, you've got to do something about it right away. Like if a kid says, coach is a bully, I'm a bully, well, you've got to let your supervisor know. You've got to make sure you've got your ducks in a row. You got to make sure everything that you're doing is, I'd say, document everything the best you can. But one of the things that I think is an important thing you can do, I would have a supervisor come to your practice sometimes, you know, especially if they think, oh, coach is a bully sometimes. You know what? Have your supervisor come there, and as a coach, don't be any different than you would any other day. I mean, I would tell kids, kind of to Sam's note, I would tell them when I recruited them, I don't yell a lot. I'm not a yeller and screamer, but I do yell. I said, when the effort is poor, that's when my voice gets louder. And just so they know, if your effort's poor, you're going to hear about it. And it's going to have to be immediate correction, because effort and attitude is what my recruiting pitch was. Effort and attitude are the only two things you get to control as a college athlete. And if those aren't what they need to be, that's on nobody else. I can't fix that for you. The other part, one that I wanted to mention, kind of one of the questions, but I think, Joanne, you mentioned it, the bullying, if you will, over someone's, I think it was overweight, not in shape, one of the questions that came across. And I think Angel hit the nail on the head. Not all of us have the same resources and nutritionists and things that Angel and her staff might have as resources, but you can keep everything performance-based. It's not you're overweight. It's how do you feel, you know, look at the times, whether it's timed runs or, you know, bases from A to B, from first to second, around the bases, whatever it is you guys can use as stats, use performance-based, and everything can be performance-based. Soccer, obviously fitness and cardio was a huge part of our game. So everything we could document, there's all kinds of fitness testing, and we could use that performance-based, not to say, and it was not a body composition thing, but how do we perform better if you're out of the average range? And some of it we would let our strength coach or nutrition experts kind of handle. But as a coach, you use numbers and facts, because those can't be disputed. And those things, you know, for us, your 2 mile time is 2 minutes past the average of the group, or whatever it might be. And that's just stating a fact. It's not bullying somebody. It's not demeaning, but it's telling them where they are in comparison to the rest of their teammates. And I think the explaining expectations, like I mentioned, and then having people involved. Like I said, it's pretty funny when a supervisor is watching a practice and a coach still yells and screams because effort's poor, and all the kids look at the supervisor, and the supervisor kind of nods their head like, yeah, the effort's poor, you need to hear about it. that's part of being coached as a college athlete, you know. And not all coaches yell, but if you're accused of bullying, it's probably something along those lines. So I think those are some things that you can do as a coach to kind of show them that you're on the same page and show them kind of the expectations you have.
Thank you very much. We're going to switch gears here slightly, but before we do, panelists, anybody with anything to add? I don't want to, Jill, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I do just want to add, because the term bullying, I think, has taken on a life of its own. Bullying to me is what my 4th grade daughter did to the 3rd grader on the bus. Bullying is not what a coach does to an athlete. You are either coaching your athlete or perhaps you're mistreating your athlete, but you don't bully athletes. And I hate that term. And I hate it when coaches are called bullies, because they're not. They might be a bad coach. They might be, you know, engaging in some coaching methods that are crappy and suck and aren't helpful, but that doesn't mean that they're a bully. And so, you know, and I know this is not, but talking to your administration about that, like, look, you're going to get accused of being a bully. You're going to get accused of being a bully and abusive from an athlete who's not performing well, underperforming, unhappy, misses their boyfriend, whatever it is. You know, those kinds of things happen, right? But that's not bullying. Your response is not bullying. And the sooner I think you guys accept that that language doesn't apply to you, your athletes can bully each other, but your administration doesn't bully you any more than you bully your athletes. Your administration gives you directions on how and what they want you to do. You give your athletes directions on what you want them to do, which, so sorry that I'm going off on my bullying tangent here, but that word is misused and it's inappropriate. And the sooner that your administration knows it, the sooner they'll recognize that, well, you're just coaching. And the sooner that your student athletes know it, then, you know, I'm telling you what to do. I'm not bullying you. I mean, sometimes it's that simple, telling them, I'm not bullying you. I am just trying to get maximum performance out of you. What do you want me to do in order to get maximum performance out of you? Right? It's sometimes just calling it out can really be helpful. And I know that's not a magic answer for everything, but the bullying thing is just under my skin, because these are adults for most of it. And you're all adults. All the coaches are adults and they're not bullying anyone. The administrators aren't, and don't use that language towards your administrators either, because it doesn't help you. You're grown-ups, right? They're just giving you direction. They might suck at the direction they're giving you, but it's just direction. And rant.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Joe, and I got one thing to add to Brian.
Yeah, go, Angel, go.
Just to emphasize what Brian said is be consistent in your behavior, no matter who the audience is. Because the moment that you are inconsistent in your behavior, your athletes will sniff that out. And then credibility is shot. That's all I have.
Yeah, no, accurate statement. And then in response to switching gears, a good question on some team building. You know, where's the line between team building and hazing? And I immediately think of like a high ropes course or something that's vulnerable, because there's growth and vulnerability, but vulnerability is also really scary. So Jen, I'm going to come back to you on this and talk to us a little bit about how those things collide.
So hazing, you know, one aspect we haven't talked about hazing is that it's usually done in secret. And so it's usually something that you would not tell someone else that is happening. So as we think about the high ropes course, I would, you know, most of us would say, hey, my team's going to go out and do this high ropes course. The coach is aware. You would tell, you know, the athletic director and that sort of thing. And so, you know, one piece is there secrecy around that activity? And if there is, that's probably a good sign that it is hazing. Another question you can ask is, will the veteran members of the team refuse to do this activity that I'm asking the rookies to do? And again, if the answer is yes, that, you know, the veterans are like, there's no way I would do this. Again, probably another good sign that it is moving towards hazing rather than just a team building. I do think again, from a non-legal perspective, hazing behaviors are very, very nuanced. I mean, very, very nuanced. And at what point in time does something cross the line? And talking with athletes, most of them have no idea either. Their response is, well, I know it when I see it. And then I would follow up over and over again. Well, what would that be? How would you know that it crossed the line into hazing or something more serious? And most of them weren't able to pinpoint where that was, other than to say, I know it when I see it. And so that's to say that I think sometimes having conversations about the nuanced piece of hazing is important, as well as to talk about, one of the things that we often hear is that, well, we haze because we want to become closer as a team. We're really, doing this for team cohesion and that sort of thing. And to talk about other ways to establish team cohesion where everyone is involved and no one is being degraded or embarrassed or having to do something because they want to be a part of the team.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Another question on here that's interesting is a little bit of the dynamic between assistant coaches and head coaches. So Samantha, coming to you on this one, if there's an assistant coach who, now I'm a little nervous to use the word, Jill, if there's an assistant coach who is feeling bullied by a head coach, what should they do? How can you address that? Or what should the head coach be doing to make sure that feeling isn't there? Is it as simple as just addressing it early?
So I literally just had a conversation yesterday, with this dynamic. And I'm not saying I have the magic answer, but I want to emphasize workplace conflict is not unique to sports, right? It happens in every industry. Brian's out of coaching, and I think he would recognize that workplace conflict, difficult conversations, moments of stress or disagreement. And so to Jill's point about being adults and being able to have adult conversations about it is important. And I think sometimes those can be challenging in this athletic setting because, you spend a lot of time together as a staff, right? And so it does start to feel like family, but you're not quite family. And so, what I would encourage is one, I'm always happy to have those have those pre-conversation talks, with a coach, either an assistant or a head coach. This is going on. I want to deal with it. And it's emotional. This a coach that I spoke with yesterday was really stressed about it and even angry a little bit. And so, it's kind of talking down the emotion and really getting people to think about what's the goal here. You're working together to get this team to perform well. Everybody's going to bring skills and talents and experiences. I hope you have different styles, right? I think that helps. But sometimes when those styles or approaches, kind of conflict or even just aren't quite in line, I do believe it is, since the head coach bears all this responsibility, ultimately, it is the head coach's approach or philosophy or take, that should govern. But I really do encourage you head coaches on the call to listen and to be open and to have, those, those staff meetings and conversations where you are really listening to different points of view and different ways of approaching it, even some feedback, right? Even some feedback, which can be a little bit tough. Coaches are really great about giving critical feedback to others, but sometimes it's hard to take it. And especially if you're the head coach and you're in charge, right? But I really encourage assistants, to have those adult conversations and not necessarily to circumvent or bypass because, you're working together. You really are on the same team, like literally, right? And so how can you kind of realign and work out whatever the difference is? In the extreme cases, I understand, but I just think that those are rare. When it's then what I hope is your SWA, if you're out of college, is there, your senior women's administrator is there as a resource, or your sports supervisor that you can go and have a conversation and say, I really would like to work this out. This is what's going on. Can you help? Can you give me some advice? But those are some thoughts.
Thank you. And, we can't forget too, a lot of times in university settings as well, and in high school settings for sure, your assistant coaches and head coaches even can be very young, very inexperienced. My first year as a Division I head coach, I had 2 graduate assistants. They were 22. I was also young, and so you're trying to teach many things other than just coaching. You're trying to teach the adult behavior and what's expected and how you can do that. And I think sometimes we forget that too. Is there's a learning process that's involved, and a lot of that is experience. So trying to guide that. Brian, what's your take on your role as a head coach and how you can manage all these things? A lot of moving pieces here, and it seems to all boil back down to relationships.
Absolutely. I think you stole it there with relationships. I think the communication and relationships is the key to everything. Well, and recruiting, as Sam mentioned earlier, but recruiting the right types of kids, communicating expectations, even communicating within your staff. I think that's the expectations from the staff. I think it's a lot easier to hold somebody accountable when you give them a clear list of expectations. Here's what the expectations are from you as an individual, from you as a group of upperclassmen, you as a senior, you as a starter, you as a pitcher or catcher, whatever you might be. And so I think that communication, one thing that I found that I realized kind of in my last couple of years is I didn't have, they moved our offices. So we weren't convenient. Like we used to be right by our soccer field. So there were kids popping in every day on the way to practice, outside the training room. And when our offices were on the other end of campus, it was a chore for people to come see us. And so I finally had to go to the middle of campus and go to Starbucks or go to the outdoor patio and just meet with kids. And it would meet with kids not in trouble, meet with kids not having performance evaluations, but meet with them for 15 to 30 minutes and just say, how are you doing? What's going on with you? What outside of soccer? Here's where soccer is, but how you're doing, because we talk about that regularly. How's everything else going? And trying to keep those lines of communication open. And I think that also helps them feel more comfortable when it's a tough conversation, when maybe they are getting bullied by a teammate, or they're afraid of hazing that's happened or something like that. If you keep having those conversations and you had them over and over, just the I won't call it small talk, but the non-sport talk, they'll feel more welcome and more open. Okay, I've talked to coach about everything else. I might as, this is something that I can feel comfortable because I know he cares, and making sure they know that you care about them. Kind of like Angel mentioned, if you're not sincere and you're not intentional about it, they'll know if you're being fake about it. And so you have to care about them as individuals, and collectively care about the team as a group as well.
Absolutely. So Angel, let's come to you on this one. As a coach, if you're starting to have this idea that something's just not right, there's a dynamic that you can't work out, what do you think the proper steps are in bringing that to an administrator's attention and dealing with that in an early fashion, getting help with that early on? Jill, we'll come to you on this next.
Very great question. Typically, if your gut is telling you something going on, 9 times out of 10, something is going on. I think being great communicators with, and we talked about this before the live panel, but having a relationship with your compliance office, I think is a great opportunity to continue to develop and understand the nuanced experiences that might come if you definitely identify that there's something going on that might have a hazing kind of smell to it, or even a bullying kind of smell to it, and then just really kind of leaning heavily on their advice in terms of understanding that you might not necessarily have all of the facts together, but just talking it through with someone who has that legal mindset, I think is extremely important. I think it's also important to check in with the remainder of your coaching staff, because those are also individuals who might have a better pulse on what's going on with the team. Hopefully there's also a great relationship with your athletic training staff. I can't say it enough about athletic training staff, because they are definitely the gatekeepers of a lot of information in terms of what's going on with the athletes. Their barriers are kind of broken down just from a kinesthetic standpoint. And at times, the training room is where all of the tea is spilled in terms of just being public information. And so hopefully your coaches have a really good relationship with those different parts of the system, because we all can kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together, which just makes us stronger. And then also, empowering your assistant coaching staff members to also be the go-to people, because sometimes the athlete is just not going to want to come to the head coach just because of that perceived strength and power in that particular structure. And so, if there is something that you suspect is going on with a particular athlete and you know for sure that they have a relationship with someone else on your staff, it's actually okay to kind of put that person on your staff member's radar for them to be the ones to check in, not necessarily to be nosy, but just to also kind of go off of what Brian said in terms of negotiating with that relationship that has already been built, because that athlete might actually disclose something to that person because that relationship previously exists.
Thank you. Jill, anything to add there?
Yeah, I love how Angel is so positive, because I was coming at it from a very negative perspective. So I was looking at it from, what happens when you're assistant coach, there's such a conflict there and you feel undermined. Or from the assistant coach, your head coach won't listen to a gosh darn word that you're saying. And that, from my perspective, is always one of the first questions that I ask when a coach, is coming to me, is what's your relationship like with your assistant coach? Do they support you or do they not? And a lot of times when head coaches get in trouble, it's when their assistant coach is undermining them. They've got the ear of the athletes, just like Angel was saying, which is what you want. But when you have unhappy athletes, that then turns into a real problem, because they're bonding with the athletes. They're potentially after your job. I mean, I hear that a lot, right? When you have problems with assistant coaches, that they're after your job. And so from what the head coach or the assistant coach, if they're feeling undermined by their head coach, needs to do is everyone just needs to document. What conversations are you having? What are you talking about? And go to your administration, right? Like, they need to know. I mean, this is a workplace, as Samantha said, this is a workplace conflict. And it happens in every single profession around the country. I don't care if you're working, on a machine and you're a machinist, or if you're in my office, we have conflict too, right? Like, it just happens. So making sure that it's documented and making sure that you're going to your administration is key, because they should have tools to help you with this. They usually have a conflict management area that you can go to. HR should be informed. They might have strategies and things in place to help you through it. And sometimes it's just a bad hire, right? Like, that happens. You're making a hire at the last minute. You don't have the right person in the job, and you get to that point. But that's one of the common things that I see when there's a breakdown of the coaching relationship, is that sometimes that assistant coach can be undermining the head coach. And if you feel like that's happening, you need help. You you have to talk to that assistant coach, but you have to go to your administration, because it's just a really important piece, so that it's not only documented, but that you can hopefully fix it.
Yeah, Brian.
I would say, kind of on the same page with Jill, if you're a head coach and you don't trust your assistant coach, you need a new assistant coach. I mean, to me, that's pretty plain and simple. I mean, obviously it's good to document things. Your school may require that, but if you feel like you're being undermined, you can have an honest conversation about it in case it's a mix up or something like that. But kind of like Angel said, you go with your gut. If your gut's telling you, I shouldn't trust this assistant or whatnot, and it's not somebody that's a close friend of yours that, I was fortunate to hire a lot of friends of mine that I knew well. But if you kind of have the blind best resume type assistant that you don't have, but at the same time, hope you check references, find some level of connection with a close friend of yours to vouch for them. Because if it doesn't work and you can't trust them, then you got to find a new one. It's not going to work if you don't feel like you can trust them. There's way too much time and way too much trust involved with the staff to not trust your assistant coaches.
And really quickly, I think I answered the question thinking that I was answering a different question. So I do want to add to that. Yes. Really quickly, in terms of conflict, because I'm glad that Jill brought that up, because it's not uncommon for the head coach to not necessarily be able to trust the assistant coach often. And so from a preventative standpoint, one of the things that we try to encourage coaches to do, especially if they're in the hiring process, is really come up with their coaching development model, right? So we talk about your coaching philosophy for athletes, but what is your coaching development model for your staff? And so that's another approach to kind of look at as well. You know, what are some of the staff development models that fit with your philosophy as you are trying to build a culture that ultimately, one of the other ways to kind of sniff out a little bit if something is going on with you and your coaching staff is pay attention to your athlete culture, because 9 times out of 10, the athlete's behaviors are a symptom of the coaching behaviors. And so those are great clues to be able to kind of check in with. And then also there are different kind of conflict resolution models. We tend to use the Staben model, where you identify the source of the issue, the timing of addressing it is important, having an amicable approach to it, being specific about the behaviors that are being on your radar that you want to address, and then the emotions that it evokes. I know not a lot of us like to entail our emotions, but our emotions are in it. And then also stating what our needs are. And I think the last part, the end piece, is the piece that we don't practice enough of. We can identify issues and problems all day long, but when it comes to articulating what our needs are from that person, that's the piece that takes a lot of work and a lot of effort.
Thank you all very much. Switching gears here a little bit, and if you ask this question, if you're on the call and this was your question, I'm not sure if I completely understand it. So Jen, I'm going to read it verbatim to you. I'm going to just have you give your best shot. And if I'm missing something, go ahead and get me in the chat and I'll follow up with it. But the question is, can you give tips on handling questions involving race and social justice in regards to bullying and hazing? So if there's anything that just pops into your mind with that, and then any other panelists, if you have anything to add or think you might have an idea of what direction that's taking, feel free to chime in after Jen here.
Yes, thank you. So we know the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice, that, you know, this reckoning of sorts is going on right now in our country in a lot of different ways. And so what I think is important is that as a coach, that we've reflected some on our own thoughts, experiences, privileges, what we are bringing to the setting as we enter it. And so we know that that reflection then kind of carries through in terms of the ways that we interact with others. And so that, I mean, that's just critical kind of across the board. And any opportunities with anti-bias training, with diversity, equity, inclusion training, I mean, there is just layer upon layer of information to continue to learn, regardless of how many times you've attended or thought about something. So I highly, highly recommend that piece. I believe we need to approach diversity as a way that helps us flourish, helps bring different perspectives, help us be better prepared, helps us just be better humans with that both shared humanity and that diverse experience. So the way that I was interpreting this question is really less along the lines of bullying and hazing, because I don't think we have a lot of data or research kind of looking at hazing and bullying specifically from a social justice or racial perspective. What I was thinking more about is how this intersects with microaggressions, and that is probably ways that we may see kind of bullying happen. And depending on where you are and what you have thought about or know about microaggressions, I often think about microaggressions, or at least it helps me think about them as being both contextual and personal. And that's what makes them challenging, right? So if the context changes, that same comment or that same experience, I might perceive it really, really differently. So if I'm in a room of all men and there's a comment made, the way that I perceive that comment is going to be probably really different than if I'm a woman in a space with all women. And so that context and then who I am and what I bring to that situation also is going to impact how I experience, you know, an event, a comment, something like that. So what I think happens though a lot of times as we're talking about hazing and bullying is that we forget that there are these other power and privilege relationships that intersect in terms of racial, ethnic, sexual orientation, and gender identity, sexual identity that are playing out. And so sometimes our hazing and maybe our ways that we think about bullying don't reach the mark because we forget about those dynamics happening also. So I just want to put a shout out. There's the Mentors in Violence Prevention Program, the MVP program that operates. They use a bystander training approach, and it was really founded on kind of a social justice approach, and they use scenarios that are looking at gender, race, ethnicity as a way to get athletes to kind of grapple with some of these issues. So I may have talked around the issue, but I think that hopefully there are some snippets of information that will continue the conversation.
Thank you. Absolutely. Samantha, I think you wanted in on this one.
So these issues got real in 2020 for our coaches. And, I think great, but hard, put our coaches in some tough spots in terms of managing difference of opinion on teams and respect and inclusivity during an election year that was, highly politicized, during Black Lives Matter, the use of social media by student athletes, which, we do not and should not regulate, but boy, when you have teammates posting one message and then another teammate posting something that's diametrically opposed, none of which are really, personalized, or their expressions, right? They're expressions of opinion, and how our coaches navigate that. And one called me this fall, and she had a few players on her team who were organizing and speaking at a Black Lives Matter movement rally and expected their whole team to come. And there were members of the team there were a few who didn't want to come. And it was not that they didn't think that Black Lives mattered. They were part of police families. And so some of the messaging was defunding the police. And so there you have this conflict that's political, racial, all this, and now it's in your team, and how do you navigate that? And, I think one with help with a good sports supervisor and good resources, in your department or at your university. And then I think coming back to, we've talked a lot about rules and policies and regulations, but, culture really, I see as as positive. How are we treating each other, and coming back to some of the values of your program and really kind of honing in that we can have differences of opinions, but we do respect each other and we care about each other and we are on the same team, and being able to be comfortable with those differences, but still fundamentally, respect each other. But I expect this to continue, these issues. And so they might not, slide, I hope to God not slide down into the hazing, and kind of bullying, but definitely tensions and dynamics around these issues on teams. And I just would encourage coaches to, to have these conversations with your administration, with your sports supervisor on how to handle it, how you are handling it, and really coming back to those core values that you are all united when it comes to playing this sport and treating each other as people, but there will be differences of opinions,
Thank you very much. Any other panelists want in on this one before we move on?
I feel like I've been talking a lot, but this is my jam right here. So I actually also serve on the Southeastern Conference's Racial and Social Justice, Equity, and Inclusion Council, appointed by our campus president and our AD and some other administrators. And so these are conversations that we're having at the higher level from a conference perspective, and how that has influence and impact across all 14 different institutions across the SEC. And so it's been interesting to be a part of that administrative panel, but then there are also other panels involved where it is strictly coaches. And then there's also another panel that's strictly student athletes across multiple sports. And so it's been interesting to be a part of the conversations that are continuously ongoing. And I think that's one of the key indicators is this is not a one and done conversation. This is a human conversation. And so being able to provide a culture that offers the opportunity to have these candid conversations, the real and raw conversations. I think someone mentioned it earlier. The true path to greatness is, this idea of vulnerability. And yes, going into it, even giving the disclaimer and priming it as a difficult conversation can kind of set us up for failure. And so if we kind of couch it in a way to where, look, this is a human conversation, because each of you that are on this roster has the level of value that we need on this team. Each of you on this roster has a level of respect on this team. And these are things that we're going to continuously talk about in a way that helps to facilitate that level of respect across the spectrum. I think is extremely important. I think, coaches are definitely in a very hard position in a role, because at the end of the day, your teams are going to look at you as the compass for all of this. And one thing that I will say is, if you are perpetually sending the message that each person has value, has added value, whether you are the star on the team or whether you are the last person on the bench, your identity matters to me, I think is such a very palpable conversation to have, that they will run through walls for you. Because over and over again, one of the things that comes into my office, especially during this time period when things were really escalated, is this idea of athletes not feeling seen. And so the best thing that we can do as coaches and as administrators and individuals that are a part of the sport ecosystem is to help our athletes feel seen.
Thank you very much, Angel. Appreciate it. Anything else on that question before we move forward? All right. One thing I want to get to, because I think it's extremely beneficial. And so, Jen, I'll come back to you. You're just a leadoff hitter. I don't know if you were a softball player at all, but that's the role that you're in this one. You just keep coming back to you and your experiences and research. But a great question here, asking for resources. Where are places that coaches can go to learn more about bullying and hazing? And it's such a private thing. How can coaches find people who have gone through bullying and hazing team situations in order to try to learn and connect? So any thoughts on that one?
So I will say that after playing college sports, I did play on a co-ed summer softball team. We had an awesome name. We were the Voodoo Misfits, which just is awesome. So yes, I was not leadoff hitter, however. So, the NCAA has a number of resources online about hazing. I haven't been there for a while, so I don't know if it's been updated or not, but that is some pretty solid information that they've gathered together. The Mentors in Violence Prevention, the MVP program, has information and really takes a bystander approach to how to talk with athletes about some of these issues. And so that would be another place to go. There's not a lot of hazing applied practical resources out there. And again, I think that goes to this idea that's this open secret. We know it's happening, but there's not really a way forward or a lot of discussion. And your second part of that question, Joanna?
If there's a coach that's looking for a way to get through a situation, is there someone and some place they can connect?
Again, the other piece that we know is that if you ask athletes if they've been hazed, most of them will say no. But then if you ask them if they've experienced specific behaviors that would suggest hazing, we know that there's a really high percentage that do. So I think that's one of the struggles, is that most people who've experienced it won't claim it as hazing. There's a couple, there's more student affairs type of resources. So I'd say that the Greek system, the sororities and fraternities have done a much better job in terms of putting together resources to be used and that sort of thing. And I don't have a lot. Yes, thank you, Dave. Hazingprevention.org. I don't know if they've updated. They have good stuff there, but they don't always update with new information. So.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I will say kind of my favorite wrap up and end here is just to offer a piece of advice. So you all bring such a unique perspective, and we've covered so many things in this 90 minutes, which is amazing. That's why I love these forums so much, because I told you before we even started, you never know which direction it's going to go. So it makes it really interesting, but we're going to go around just one more time. And if you would hear just, 1 minute or so, what do you think is most important for coaches to take away on this topic, or what would you urge coaches to do, as they move through the season, their career, whatever it might be, in regards to anything that we've covered, or maybe something we haven't that you think is important? So, Angel, we're going to start with you.
So I'll start by saying that as coaches, you have the responsibility of not only developing your players, but also developing your staff. And so having two different, legs of being able to have your philosophy for coaching development as well as athlete development readily available, handy, and posted everywhere in your environment. So that they can absorb that information. I think the other thing that sticks out to me is be consistent with your behaviors, establish and model boundaries, because boundaries is a skill set. It really helps to set the tone for what you expect. I think it was also mentioned, beginning of the year, typically there's a meeting that takes place and it's a list of things that you're not supposed to do. I think it's important to balance out that list of things with things that you are allowing to happen. Because at the end of the day, the last thing that they hear is the last thing that they're going to do. It's like parenting 101. If you tell your kids to not touch the hot stove, the last thing that they hear is the stove and they're going to touch it. So make sure that you're strategic with the words that you use. And then lastly, there are some additional resources. Like I said before, I am a facilitator with Positive Coaching Alliance as well. And so they actually have a curriculum that they can provide. Sports Can Battle Racism is an entire coaching workshop that they can facilitate for you all if you want them to do that. They also have online resources that are free with their development zone. So literally, if you just Google Positive Coaching Alliance Development Zone, there are a number of different topics that are free and readily available in terms of practical applied resources that you can use.
Thank you very much. And for those of you that had asked for the example form, Angel's going to get that to me, and we will send that out to anyone who registered for the webinar. So we can also get that on our forum site. So coaches that watch it after the fact will have access to that. So Angel, thank you very much for that. Brian, how about you? Piece of advice, things that you would urge coaches to do moving forward?
Yeah, I think a couple different things. For me, have a plan for hazing. That was kind of what I kind of got caught and stuck in a bad situation. And it was, I guess I wasn't planned or prepared for it. So I kind of had to shoot from the hip a little bit. Communicate with your administration about it. If it does happen, make sure you've got a plan, make sure you've got a plan of action, how to, if it's the school is involved, obviously they'll kind of take over, which was what happened in my case, but, have constant communication, consistent communication with your team, with your leaders, with the upperclassmen, everybody, encouraging, trying to set that and keep that, the culture. I know it's a cliche a little bit, the culture word going, but make sure you encourage that culture of how do we build each other up? How do we encourage each other? How do we make each other better? How do we have fun together without tearing somebody down or not at somebody's expense? Even if you don't have to go through all the, all the things they do socially, but you can go through examples of how they can have fun socially without tearing the team apart, things that are positive for the entire team. And then just one note also on the bullying side of things. If you see or hear bullying, or even if you don't, if you hear whispers or rumors, if it's within your team, I experienced it probably more so player to player, older player to younger player. As soon as you see or hear that, you have to absolutely address it. And it doesn't mean the person's guilty just because you heard it. If you didn't see it yourself, but you heard it, go ahead and start to address it, do some homework, but try to address it with the players, because your players are watching and your players know if they see a bully that's going on for weeks and weeks and it's never addressed, then I've now said it's okay to do that. But if it's something where someone says, hey, so-and-so feels bullied by this upperclassman, and even if you don't necessarily have to punish the upperclassman if you don't see it and have enough evidence, if you will, the lawyers will tell us, but have conversations about it. And that conversation will get out. People will go, oh, coach talked to her about this. He's not okay, or she's not okay with this type of action, this type of, bullying, if you will, to another player. And the players will see that and they'll appreciate that as well.
Thank you very much. Samantha, parting thoughts.
I always get to this moment and I want it to be like really, really good. I think we've talked about a lot of important things, and this is a heavy topic. This really can be a coach's worst nightmare, right? If they find out that they have hazing going on in their team, or they've been wrongly accused of bullying or being abusive, or they have it. And I think what I really want you to hear is, if you're an NFCA member, we are here for you, right? And my calendar link is on the website. I'm here to support and have conversations. And then if things get really bad, then I send people to jail. So I think just that you're not alone, you're not navigating this alone. I hope that you have heard some positive tidbits and advice and direction, on how you can set yourself up, to prevent this from happening. But if you have concerns or you're dealing with it, you don't have to brave it alone, and it's better to call earlier than later.
Thank you very much. Jen, your parting thoughts.
I think most of them have been said, but I would just like to commend your organization, the association, on having these difficult conversations and these panels to understand really complex societal issues that are going on, to try to make sure that we're creating environments where our athletes want to stay involved and become lifelong learners and movers through whatever they have to go through. And so just thank you for letting me be a part of it. And again, I commend your association for this work.
Well, thank you. And thank you for saying yes on a random email asking you to bring all of your knowledge. I am always amazed by people that are willing to share their passion and their specialty. And you definitely brought that. So thank you very much. Jill, you're the cleanup hitter. So you get to bring it home for us.
Yeah, which was never me. I could only slap bunt, and I was fast enough to run to first base. So I was usually lead off and then never got on. So, but yeah, so no, I echo what everyone else has said. I would just add one thing that we didn't really touch on, but don't be afraid to use your other coaches, right? Especially of your other female sports. They are a really good resource for you. And I think a lot of times coaches get caught up in their own little world that they forget that there's another coach of a non-revenue sport who is going through the exact same thing. And supporting each other and helping each other is really, really important. I'm going to say something really unpopular right now, but with COVID and everything else, I'm seeing a lot that women's sports are under attack. You're seeing all the universities who are going after women's sports. And standing up and fighting for each other and fighting for each other's sports is very important. Softball is a sport that is under attack. There are conferences that are looking at wanting to get rid of softball, and there are conferences that are wanting to get rid of swimming, and you all are resources for each other. So don't be afraid to stand up for each other, and you'll learn something, because chances are you got a coach who's gone through some hazing, who's gone through some bullying, who can give you some guidance on what to do. So don't be afraid to use those resources within your own departments.
Thank you very much. Great advice from all of our panelists, great insight. Thank you for joining us. And as always, we do this every month. It is open to all, any coach, any sport, anywhere, any person. So we are thrilled to continue the conversation, the hard conversation, and ones that need to take place. So thank you all for joining us this evening. You can see in the chat, we will be back. Mark your calendars. And if you have topics that you just can't get the resources that you're looking for, let us do the legwork. That's what we're here for. So we will continue to support you and on your educational quests. Until then, thanks for joining us, and best of luck as we are playing ball once again. That's maybe the most exciting part, right? Jen had some great softball on her campus in the Unidome last weekend. So that was
yes, we did.
It was great softball. So thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Best of luck. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.